There's no beauty here, only death and decay.
Welcome to The Beauty of Horror, a podcast dedicated to exploring the unsettling beauty found within our favorite genre. Each episode, I'll sit down with a different guest to discuss a horror film they find particularly beautiful and why. I'm your host, Chandler Bullock, and today's guest is a horror journalist, the head critic and chief content creator for Bloody Disgusting. She is also co-host of the Bloody Disgusting podcast on the Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network. Beautiful greetings to Meagan Navarro.
Hello.
Hello indeed. So happy to have you on and talking about quite an interesting film today. So super cool.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Now, before we begin our discussion, I do like to kick off each episode with a quote that relates to our topic. This can be from philosophy, filmmakers, or elsewhere around the world. And today's quote is as follows. "The thing perceived, the beautiful object, has conferred on it by the beholder a surfeit of aliveness, even if it is inanimate. It comes to be accorded a fragility and consequent level of protection normally reserved for the animate. If inanimate, like a poem, it may, by being memorized or read aloud to others, thereby be lent the aliveness of the person's own consciousness." I will reveal who said that a little bit later as it kind of is time in our discussion. But first, Meagan, I want to quickly discuss with you, I'm sure you've been asked this before in other places, but not here. How is your relationship with horror? Like, how did that kind of generate and start for you?
That started when I was very, very young, and I got introduced to Ghostbusters on tape, and I watched it like every day, and it just kind of instilled a love of monsters. And I would go with my dad to the video store and like basically seek out other monster movies, and to his credit, he let me watch whatever. So yeah, I just started, trying to consume all of the monster stuff I can find, and that kind of became this lifelong passion for me.
Wow, okay, so Ghostbusters kind of started it all, and I guess
Yeah.
You weren't afraid of no ghosts, it seems.
I mean, I was too, not enough to, I think I got hooked on that thrill. Like that library ghost scene in the opening was such a like spooky, thrilling thing for me. And I, just that feeling, just the monsters, the creativity, and that trying to chase that high of the adrenaline rush of fear. So yeah.
Right, yeah, I know a lot of people that I know who got to see Ghostbusters at a young age. They cite that library scene as well for them as this real kicking point, either for, not necessarily for horror like yourself, but just for them to like really get sucked into the film, because up until that point, it's very adult humor. But if you're a child, you do look for more thrill. And something to really catch your attention. So I'm happy to hear it made an impact on you as well. And you said you're looking for like monsters and stuff. Are there any types of monsters in general that you seem to gravitate towards more, and maybe why you would like them so much?
Then or now? Because
let's do both, actually. I'd like to hear the difference.
Well, I mean, then I was pretty indiscriminate. It was all new. I didn't, you have a child's brain. I chose movies based on the pictures on the cover box. So, that meant that I also ended up with a lot of the junk. But, I think now that I've kind of fine-tuned that. So now I like things that are gorgeous as far as practical effects. But I tend to like, the full-blown creature features, especially aquatic. Not necessarily, I do like, the sharks and the crocodiles and whatnot, but, you give me like a Cthulhu or something like that underwater and I'm in love.
I see. Do you have like just a normal, I say normal, do you have a general, that's a better word, a general love of like the sea and other aquatic themes, or is it really like a combination with horror that seems to like, get you?
I'm always fascinated by the sea, but I think I always look at it through a horror lens. I think that I am terrified by the sea. there's things in there that we were never meant to discover as far as I'm concerned. So I think I always look at it with this kind of horrific fascination. Even though I'll never encounter deep sea anglers, and they're probably not even a threat considering their size, they're still inherently terrifying to me. So yeah, I think it's always kind of both. I'll marry everything to horror if I can.
Yeah, I totally get that. That's pretty much been my entire academic career and my life. I actually had a teacher once say to me, because he himself brought in a lot of horror into his work, because we talked a lot about emotion and phenomenology being the study of our experiences in the world. It can be a little dark sometimes.
Yeah.
And he just he looked at me once. He's like, "There's more to life than horror." I said, I don't agree. I do not agree with you.
Yeah, I agree.
And I have to agree with the sea as well. I grew up on the sea front. At least when I was younger. My formative years were in Pensacola in Florida. So I love the sea. Yeah. But I get you. It's kind of like our own kind of terrestrial encounter with the cosmos, if you will. Yes. We can go to it, but it's just as mysterious and weird.
We are just tiny little ants in that ocean. We were not evolved to be there.
No. In fact, we did the opposite thing, and I think there's part of us that's like, don't go back. It's not made for you anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I've heeded that.
Right. Well, good. That sounds very... your work here as a horror journalist and someone who pays attention to the narratives has really paid off. You're taking the signs and rolling with it very well then. Speaking of which, then, so have you always thought, I am going to do something in the realm of horror as you were getting older, or did that kind of just build its own life?
Yeah, I think that just kind of happened naturally. I don't think that you grow up realizing that that's even a career path, unless you are actively pursuing, filmmaking, which I was not. I just, I think... horror is just intrinsically part of, loving horror movies was something that never went away. And I just kind of started up a blog for my own personal amusement, really. I didn't think I would have any readers, and I didn't, but it would just lead to, other like-minded bloggers, which eventually kind of became stepping stones for other opportunities to eventually here I am now. So it was not something I thought would happen. It just kind of naturally happened that way.
See, that's beautiful in and of itself. I love to hear these stories because there's so many people right now who are doing the same thing, and it's easy to get demoralized, especially now that there is a precedence for it. There is a whole career path carved out by a lot of pioneers such as yourself. And so people aspire to be in these positions, or at the very least to just even touch what we consider like this mountain of glory of horror journalism. And then you start a blog or a podcast, and you think, well, nobody's engaging with this thing. And you just kind of have to keep doing it for yourself, right? Like the passion comes from within.
And you have to be patient. Like the goal, I think you set yourself up to fail when you set that as a goal, because it takes years. Like people think that I sprung out of nowhere, but I was writing for my own personal amusement for years. And then I was writing for some smaller sites for free didn't have any income for years before I even got my first paid gig. And even then that was a while before, so it was like tiny baby steps along the way that took a very long time. And I think that people get discouraged, like you said, thinking it's like, I'm just going to start a blog and, Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. Well, yeah, but not overnight.
No, exactly. You don't just build a baseball stadium with no sports being, shown at the stadium.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, and I'm really happy that you point that out, though, because, that's a great message to anybody who's listening who's like, oh, I'd really like that. Well, hard work, it can and does often pay off. It doesn't mean it will, right. But, talent is talent. And even if nobody can see it right now, if you really believe in your talents and you are also willing to invest and grow and take feedback and be malleable, it goes a long way, because look where you are now.
Yeah. Yep. Just hang in there. Just make sure that you're doing what you want for you. Like what amuses you is a little bit more important than some perceived or a perception of success, because the roads are so different across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super valuable message right there. I have to co-sign that, and I'm still working on it myself, but keep your confidence up and know you got this, basically. Yeah. And no matter how often life tries to tell you otherwise.
There you go.
Excellent. I think we're getting nicely warmed up. Got a bit of a rapport building. We're chatting nicely. So I think it's time for us to start drifting into our film. So what film are we talking about today?
We are talking about The Lure.
The Lure from 2015. Very interesting pick. When you told me about it, I'd heard about it before, but because I didn't know much, I was like, oh, okay. For some reason in my mind, it was a comedy. So I thought, nobody's done that yet. But then I saw it today, and I was like, oh, yeah, I would pick this too. For anybody who hasn't seen it, before we get into Meagan's motivations for this and the film itself, I like to bring in just a brief synopsis that they have on IMDb and see if it actually holds up to our discussion, because these films are often far more than IMDb likes to say they are. IMDb says that in Warsaw, a pair of mermaid sisters are adopted into a cabaret. While one seeks love with humans, the other hungers to dine on the human population of the city. I would say that's a little misleading, would you not?
I'd say some of it is accurate, but yeah, it does set up a different expectation than what you get.
Exactly. I hear. So for those who are hearing the wonderful sounds of my own siren in the household, that is Mercy the cat, and she says hello, and she will probably continue to do so throughout it. There will be no editing of this. Enjoy my cat.
As you should.
So you're warned. As you should. Yes, just keep the cat in, and she's playing, so you're probably going to hear boxes tumble around too. But yay, we're people with lives. Wonderful. Onto The Lure, though. So when I approached you and I asked for you to think of a film that you found particularly beautiful, well, for one, how quickly did your brain go to this film? And then why did you choose it?
Almost immediately. I think that this was probably the first thing that popped into my head for many reasons. One, I think it's a movie that likely hadn't been discussed before. I don't think a lot of people immediately clicked to this or even aware of its existence. So that made it an easy choice. But two, it's stunning on a visual level. It is stunning to me on an emotional level. It's just, it's one of my favorites, hands down.
I can see why. And yeah, I agree. The visuals, the story, and the sound in this movie. I'm so happy you brought this one in because, I don't think I've ever seen a modern horror musical, so that was nice and refreshing. I think it's pretty much like Rocky Horror was where the timeline stopped for me when it came to the two coming together. Yeah. So nice to see what's going on in the 2000s with this genre. And secondly, talking aesthetics in general is already not super common. Talking about beauty is even less common, and then within all of this, talking about sound and music in the context of film and aesthetics is just really under-discussed and looked at, even in academia. So I'm really happy that we have an opportunity to kind of have to, because it's really fundamental to the film.
Absolutely.
So let's see, where are we going to start with this one? You know what? How about we start with the start? This isn't necessarily going to be a play-by-play kind of podcast.
Right.
We're going to bounce around, go into some spoilers. So if you haven't seen the film yet, I do urge anybody to go check it out. I know in certain regions it's on Netflix right now, so it is easily accessible.
Also on Criterion Channel, at least. Yeah. So.
Okay, there you go. So if you're stateside, North America, or UK, Criterion, check that out as well. So the opening shot then, I think already sets up a lot of the tone for the film, where you have the band just playing on the beach. I thought this was a wonderful way to introduce these characters. So for me, what was going through my head when I was watching, of course, you're trying to pay attention to the lyrics since it's all in Polish.
Yes.
You have to really read what's going on, and therefore you actually pay attention to the lyrics, in my opinion, even more strongly than you would have just listening to the song.
100%.
Right? And I loved that because the amount of times that the music, it's not like a typical musical where people are just looking at you, fourth wall breaking, and telling you how they feel. They're making music, or either they're creating it or they're performing like pre-existing music that really pinpoints the emotional core of what's going on. And in this case, it all had to do with love and loss and tragedy. I thought it was very interesting opening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very clever way to set it up, really, because these people, I mean, everything, the music, the kind of eerie otherworldliness of these siren sisters. I mean, that's exactly how would you get the sirens on shore and into the human world, into this particular world? You've got this trio of musicians, like, just who does this? I mean, obviously this band does this, but they're just kind of by the shore and playing music and getting drunk, very, very tipsy already. So yeah, I guess something about it already is casting a spell from that opening. Just it's gorgeous.
That's the vibe I got from it too, is that it's, the sirens themselves cast spells throughout the whole film, which is, connecting to the mythology of the entity. And I loved how it's almost as if the music of the band cast a little bit of a glamour on them. They really wanted to check out, like, what was that? What is this vibe that we're kind of hearing? And as soon as they heard it, it really... What I loved about the story of this film is it really combines seafaring mythology with the kind of seduction of the show world.
Yes. Yeah.
On a small scale. We don't really go big, even though they do say they're going to go to America next if they had left. So I was very curious what they were planning on doing after that. But yeah, the entertainment world being explored this way, I thought was a very smart way, not only to make it a musical, but also to explore glamoring, basically, that word in multiple ways.
Through a coming of age story, it's really, I mean, when you're having a story, you need some kind of entry point into that. And usually there's like an audience proxy, but to have two mystical creatures be that audience proxy is such a kind of clever, ingenious move.
I'm happy you brought that up. Normally in a movie like this, you would have the sisters. So also, again, if you haven't watched it, but you're interested just in following along, so the two sisters, you have Golden, who is really dark-haired, and then you have Silver, who's more of a kind of strawberry blonde, redheaded sister. And yeah, normally you would have them as the antagonists, and you would follow all of the humans and see how they've kind of disrupted their lives. And I felt there was a nice back and forth there. They kind of shared that space, but really, yeah, I'm not used to the magical creatures being more or less the proxy for the audience. And that was super cool for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gives this whole interesting relationship push and pull throughout, because you've got these two, I mean, essentially animals. I mean, they're treated like animals and they're being exploited, but they are still essentially animals. So when push comes to shove, you corner animals, what happens? So it's like this crazy little, it adds that threat of violence throughout, but yet it's still beautiful.
Yeah. And I think that comes from the fact that they're exploring humanity a lot in this as well, especially through Silver, how she has this drive to love and feel the love that humans love, but also to live amongst humanity in a pure way. Since I'd say it was about 2/3 or so into the film, she decides to get corrective surgery and have her tail removed, which this movie goes in places that I did not see it going.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me, too, because it really is just a take on The Little Mermaid in its core. At least the original story by Hans Christian Andersen. So, it has a lot of the same story beats there. Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting how that isn't as adapted, like at least not as frequently as it would seem in this genre. Very often they just kind of play off sirens as like monsters.
Yeah, I guess when you have aquatic horror, it's a little bit tricky to do, period, because, you either film in water and that's a whole set of complications, or you don't, and then you struggle with making that look authentic. And so I think that's why it's kind of a niche subgenre. But yeah, I don't know why a lot of the fairy tale origins haven't really been done through the horror lens. We have fairy tale horror, but that's very niche, and it's usually not that close or faithful to the source material. But yeah, this is literally The Little Mermaid in its bloody origins mixed with the director's kind of upbringing in an 80s Warsaw kind of nightclub. I think, if I remember reading correctly a long time ago, it was like her parents or her mom owned one. So that's where a lot of this kind of atmosphere and visuals comes in, because that's something she was very familiar with when she grew up, in that setting.
Okay. Yeah, okay, that explains a lot. Yeah, there's a very strong believability to the whole thing. And, as somebody myself who's been doing comedy and stuff, you go to a lot of nightclubs and bars, and you get to see what other artists are up to. And indeed, the types of performances that they were showing, I've seen so many like them. It was really refreshing to see this done in this kind of like pseudo music video style, but in a very grounded kind of way. I never felt like this movie relied a lot on camp, as you normally see in a musical, which was fascinating to me. I don't think I've ever seen a musical just kind of go, oh, no, we're not going to be very campy about it, though.
No, it's pretty earnest.
Yeah. Perfect word. Earnest. Yes. That's a great descriptor for how I felt when watching this film. And so then knowing that, the writer and director have this connection to that world, it does resonate pretty strongly there for me. And then I want to know then, so is there a particular, I know there's a lot in this film that we can, dissect from the lens of beauty, but I'd love to know from you then, is there a particular scene or moment, visual, anything that your brain tends to go to real quick when you think about the film that's just like, this is a beautiful moment for me, or at least one of the stronger ones?
There's too many.
I know.
There's so many. Just anytime they're on stage you could probably just think, close your eyes and pluck one and it would apply to beautiful. Right. But the stage when they're performing in that club, whether it's like, what is the word I'm looking for? Burlesque, that's really gorgeous. The photo shoots that are also kind of exploitive in this model beauty sort of way is gorgeous. But I think I always, as far as performances go, think about the one where it's almost like rock music with the whole green light. It's like cast in a green glow, and the whole audience is just totally under their spell to the point of intoxicated, but there's a power to them. They're feeding off of this, and just between the music and the aesthetic of it and just the emotional impact, kind of what all of this means, I just really, really, really love that.
I love that scene too. Now, granted, I saw it for the first time today, but I have the type of, in theme, I have a very goldfish kind of brain. So, little details start to just drift off after a little while.
So you've only seen it once, so that's fair.
Exactly. But so it's I'm like, yeah, I can recall exactly the sounds and the way I felt when I was watching that scene when you're mentioning it, because it was a very impactful scene for me as well. It's a big kind of story climax forward as well when we're exploring the relationship between these two sisters after they've had some frictions. But for them to really go out there and just unabashedly be like, that's it, we're sirens, we're mermaids, we're doing our thing, and we're gonna have fun with this. It was such a cool scene. I especially loved how, with the frenzy of the audience, they started to crowd surf, and then the audience just kind of naturally got involved in their choreography. It was the visuals in that scene. And also, you mentioned that color palette, this kind of greenish glow.
Yes.
It invokes that aquatic nature that they have to them. Whereas before that, they were just kind of performers in this world. But it did feel like the first performance that was like they were in control at that moment, because they were supposed to be backup singers. And
Right.
I love very quickly that did not happen anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. This is kind of like the tipping of the scale where it's like, okay, we are now coming into womanhood, therefore we are coming into our own power, and you cannot just exploit us anymore without problems.
Exactly. And I think that's also where the ideologies between the two sisters start to split as well, where since one is more focused on love and one is more focused on empowerment and agency.
Yes.
So, and I love that was explored through their music a lot. And in fact, most of their fights were also done not just through song in a very musical way, but it's almost as if they were singing like old children's songs from when they grew up as a means to, I guess, settle a conflict. I don't know. It was a very interesting way they tried to handle that in some of the scenes.
Yeah, it's like this weird reminder that they are not of this world. But I think it just speaks. It's just yet another example that this movie forces you to not take this art literal. You have to kind of let it wash into you and kind of interpret what some of this means. Because, there's not really any hand-holding. It's not to say that this is a challenging movie and you won't understand what's going on, but you can't, it's not like a typical conventional way of telling this story.
No. There are a couple scenes for sure that are, like, if you know the kind of language of musicals, makes total sense.
Right.
But if you aren't really adept at that or studied anything like that, you might I got a little lost with one or two of them. I'm like, I don't know narratively what they're trying, like if that mattered so much or if it was just a scene of emotion, which is usually the case in those sorts of moments. A lot of the scenes with Golden, for instance, were basically her showing her animalistic side bubbling up through her frustrations. And apart from like one or two murders, I felt that most of them were more explorational than blatantly narrative, if you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, yeah, as far as a narrative goes, they don't seem to make much sense, but then you kind of think about what emotion the director is getting out of it, and it's, Silver is completely smitten. This is her first love. She's fallen for the guitarist, and and she's the Little Mermaid in this scenario, whereas the coming of age sexual awakening manifests more as literal man-eating for Golden.
Very much so, literal man-eating, yes. In fact, I think the one moment where she has a sexual encounter with a woman, she lets her live, doesn't she?
She does, and that's where it gets a little bit kind of, because this was the director's feature debut, which makes it all the more impressive for me.
Wow.
But this is where you can tell a little bit that it is her first feature, because that character actually meant to be a bigger part and got trimmed. So,
right. I could feel that.
Yeah, if you look, Criterion Channel specifically, or the Criterion if you want the hard disc, but that they show like a deleted scene of her coming back in the end and trying to stop that final kill and, trying to literally gun down Golden.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it's like, so I think that was a setup that they just kind of, it faded away into the ether in the long run, which works for me better, to be honest.
I'm actually, when you say this, I'm really happy they cut that out, because I felt that final scene was pretty perfect the way it was edited now. But the subplot, it's a shame that we don't have any of it, because, when she's like, oh, you should have been careful with who you eat, and the Marines care. And I'm like, the Marines?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, oh, wow. Sure, military, I guess, is involved in this very small-scale story.
Yeah.
But I guess they kept it in because it's a cool sequence, it does show we haven't seen for Golden her sexual awakening too clearly, because we've seen her hunting. So this was the first time she was just enjoying herself and exploring sexuality. So I can see the importance of that, but indeed the whole build up to it was kind of out of the blue, really.
Yeah.
But it led to a really cool scene, and frankly, I feel like anytime the music was playing, nothing was wasted. It was all really interesting to me, because I've had it before with musicals. Like, I don't hate them, but I don't love them. And I think it's because a lot of them meander just a little bit.
Yeah, and for me, the music makes or breaks it. Like, if you're not vibing with the music, then it's definitely going to be so much harder to connect with it. And this was not the case for me here at all.
Oh no, I vibed real hard with this movie. I mean, it's basically toxic disco industrial rock nightmare. I loved it. Everything was so good. Pop glamour.
Simp.
It could have, like, this could have been straight out of Dragula, basically.
Yes.
A lot of the stuff. I loved also the camera work too. I want to point out, like, it's more than just how the music was. You know, for instance, one of the introductions we have to the band, the Lure, we focused on the lead singer's face, and it's framed in such a way that it's almost like a 1960s American. What is it called again? American dance band? No, I forgot what it's called again.
Bandstand?
Bandstand, that's the word. I want to say dance band. I don't know. Yeah, American Bandstand. It had that kind of framing on it and stuff where it was like super retro, but you could tell from like just there's something about the way they were bringing themselves that there's a modern edge to it.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is this movie set in any particular time period? Do we have any clues?
The 80s. It is
it's
the
80s. Okay.
Yeah, but it's not. I think that this is the perfect way to do it, because so many 80s like retro set movies lean way too hard into it and like to scream, look, we're 80s. But this is 80s Warsaw. This is set in the 80s, and you get that vibe just enough. You know, through the costuming and a little bit of the hairstyling and stuff, but never enough to be like pastiche.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't feel like they were trying to evoke anything that's come before it or any specific album or anything like that. And so maybe that's the problem with a lot of like 80s set modern films, is that oftentimes it's a filmmaker that's also trying to share a feeling that they had when they were growing up in that time. And then, you know, it's nostalgia, basically, is what it turns into.
Exactly, yeah.
And this movie wasn't, like, about nostalgia. It's like, hey, remember how people were in the 80s?
Yeah,
exactly. And therefore, if you existed in that time, you just kind of didn't really notice it, did you? You know, not your day-to-day.
That's just how it was, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm happy to hear that, because it was really just kind of messing with my head that I was like, oh,
like, when?
What is this thing set?
Yeah. But that also kind of adds to the whole otherworldly fantasy part of it. It feels like it could be in our world, but also 1 foot out of our world.
And of course, by virtue of being a musical, that already kind of happens to you.
Yeah.
And by virtue of having actual mermaids in it, it does it even more to you. So yeah, I liked how they play a lot with the different types and tropes and stuff that they explore in the film, because it's not like they're breaking any new ground with any of the elements, in my opinion, but they do them all so well. I think it's more the approach that is the groundbreaking part.
Absolutely. 100%, yeah.
I always appreciate that in a movie as well. I think that's just try to figure out how your voice is telling a story that we might already know.
Yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, that's kind of tricky to do. You know, the more well-versed in storytelling we are and the further along we get, bring a new way, a new approach to it. And that's all it can take for the magic to happen.
Exactly. So we broached a little bit about how the lyrics in the film tie into the narrative quite strongly. Now, I don't recall anything off the top of my head of like literal lines from the film, but I just want to talk about that just a little bit though, because I obviously musicals are going to do this. They need to have that. Hello, Mercy. She's trying to demonstrate that. And in this case, though, I thought it was interesting how it was more they just talked about mood and feeling. It was a very interesting way the lyrics worked for me. I don't know if you felt the same.
Yeah. I guess I didn't really like consciously pick up on that, but I think I had to have, because this entire thing, you know, as I said earlier, you're really not meant to take it at narrative face value, because it's more about the emotion of this coming of age story. And that I think that has a lot to do with the music and the lyrics itself. Is like, this is where they are mentally on this journey.
I think that's what I was picking up then. Like it was very, I'm so used to a musical kind of just flat out telling you, I am happy about this, or I am now going to get a banking account, and then have a big song and dance number about it. And in this case, they would just take kind of quiet moments in people's lives.
Yeah.
And natural moments when people would kind of sing to each other.
Or the looks between the sisters. There's so much nonverbal communication in a musical that is not normal.
Yes. Very true. You know what? I'm going to shift into a different direction now, because you just inspired a different conversation I find very, very interesting.
Okay.
I loved how they communicated through like sonics, the way whales and stuff. And yet again, it's kind of like singing. It's like the songs of the ocean. And I love that I've never seen that before with mermaids and sirens. So granted, most of the time you get like one and a bunch of people who have to deal with it.
Right,
so
right.
It was really nice seeing more than one, really insinuating like the ocean's full of these. And
yes.
You are eventually going to have to coexist, is basically what that's where some of the horror comes into it. Like, oh, they've been infiltrating the surface for longer than you know.
Yeah, it's almost like a rite of passage type thing, like Rumspringa or something, where it's like, hey, you're gonna want to see what the human world is like when you reach a certain age. I mean, they had planned a tour, like you said earlier. They were gonna hit up America and see what that was like. So yeah, but I think everything about the way that they approached and designed these particular mermaids is very atypical. The sound, they're almost like whale calls between them. The teeth are way more marine-like. I don't think that you've even seen like the teeth like this before. And obviously the tails and the anatomy of it. They thought a lot about how to approach these mermaids as actual things that would exist in the sea.
I also loved how they didn't put, like, often you see like little touches of them, maybe like scales, like patches of scales on people's skin, or give them a weird like sheen or something to make it really clear, like they have the same glow that a fish's scales might make if they, if light hits it.
Yeah.
That was really nice that the upper body was human.
Yeah.
And then I love that when they get their legs, it's basically just a farce. This is just them mimicking what they think
they're like
it is.
a Barbie doll, like with the parts. Yes, there's no there's no genitalia, no human genitalia, no belly buttons, no nip. I don't think, did they have nipples? Yeah, they did.
They did have nipples, yeah. So like upper body was all
upper body,
accurate.
yeah. But everything, because the tail, when it's aquatic, I think hits above the belly button. So that everything from that below is not human. It's just a pretender.
And it was so interesting to see, like, that whole scene at first. Like, you've used the word a few times, and we can get into this now. Exploitative. There's a lot of exploitation in the film without this film feeling like an exploitation film, which is so refreshing that you can finally get some voices that are like, I'm going to make the comment that these types of films do without doing the thing that I'm commenting about.
Absolutely.
And there's still, there's still nudity, there's still sexuality explored, but the exploitative nature of the manager and of the band themselves with these girls is subtle, but there are just enough moments where it's severely uncomfortable. And just when they wanted to really like show off, granted, in some of the moments, it's like, well, would you have done any different in their position of like, what do you do? Like, you got to show somebody like, this is so cool. They don't have genitalia of any kind. Nor do they seem to have, like, a backside, basically. I can imagine somebody's imagination or just sheer, like, wonder would get them, like, look at this. But then not realizing, like, but they look very human, and maybe you are abusing these people and exploiting them in a very strange way. Like, what are you doing? It's clear that you're seeing these girls not as girls.
Yeah, which it just goes back to that whole, they're treating them like animals, like they're pets, which, are they? No, they're not really. Mm-mm. And that comes back to bite them in the end. But yeah, what do you do? I don't know. What would you do if you saw a mermaid who sung you, to pull them ashore? I don't know. But some of that, yeah, like I think it's kind of this weird, just the way the director weaves some of this throughout this coming of age story. I mean, that the cabaret owner, the one that's super sleazy at his first introduction, and they're encouraging him to get a feel for these mermaids' anatomy. It's such a sleazy, subtle, but understated moment. They could have really pushed that far, and thankfully they didn't. But I mean, later on, it's never spoken of again. It's more exploitation and how they work and use these girls for performances and for drawing in audiences. It's less about the sexuality than where it begins. So it's so weird how they do this.
It was weird. Especially like, so the owner, they did an interesting thing with him. How they show how really problematic and sleazy people can still have good business mindsets, and on the surface, when you see them walking around, can be very good at their jobs, and then the shit they do behind scenes. Because I was shocked, because he sleazed me out the moment I saw him. I know those people. I vibe with a guy like that, and yet one of the first things he has, he's just correcting one of the people to be like a little more representative. Somebody comes up to him. He asks, "Hey, what's that smell?" And the guy's like, "I don't know. I have a cold." And he's like, "Well, then go home. Don't get everybody sick." And I was like, "Oh, yeah. What? Really? Oh, I did. Okay. Didn't expect this level of care from this employer." And then he's walking around, and just every moment he criticizes anybody for anything, it's kind of warranted. Like, he's being just very good businessman. And then they finally introduce the girls to him, and the first thing he says is, "This is an establishment that serves alcohol and has stripping in it. And you bring these underage girls here." Mm-hmm. And then they're like, "Oh, but they're not real people." And then he just shows himself almost immediately.
Yeah.
It's like it turns on a dime. But like you were saying, I am really happy that they didn't go too deep into him. I think a lot of films try to give too much time for the exploration of just horrible, mindsets, basically, and ideologies, when really, like, we get that. We've had enough of that. We know that stuff really well. So it's really nice to see what they're doing instead of the girls.
Absolutely. I think it's just one minor detail of many to highlight, again, that these girls do not fit into this human world, and these people will not accept them no matter how hard they try, that they are human, but keeping it solely focused on gold and silver. This is their journey. This is their unfortunate discovery of that throughout.
Yeah. Also, you brought up another good point that I think makes a lot of the exploitation like more thematic than a blatant, like, grimy exploitation story, is the fact that they had agency from the moment they started. They glamored the band and wanted to come to shore and wanted to be in the world of entertainment.
Yeah.
So they have this kind of whatever kind of attitude about a lot of the stuff, because they're like, you can exploit me as much as you want to, because at the end of the day, I'm more powerful than you, and I'm just having fun.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they're basically children playing adults in this crazy, strange place, and some lessons are very hard to learn. Some are a little costly to learn, into adulthood. But yeah, it's ultimately like there's a fearlessness about it. Mm-hmm. They're like, we'll eat you.
Exactly. I think it's the fact that they can do that so easily that, again, I would expect a film like this to maybe have gone more into a realm of the types of topics that women and AFAB people have to deal with all the time in the real world, make it real heavy. And I'm so happy that they're like, well, except for the fact that they can just turn around and overpower you and eat you. So what about love? You know? Which is an equally devastating, hurtful, and traumatic thing to go through, because there's no like physical scars there that you wear. You just deal with it yourself. And I was quite blindsided by it and super happy that that's the direction they went with the story.
Yeah, I admit that the ending totally sucker punched me the first time. And that's also why I love it, because I think if it was this happily ever after, it would not have hit as hard as it did.
I wholeheartedly have to agree on that one. And on a philosophical sense, since that's my background and kind of the progenitor of this podcast, is when we discuss beauty and philosophy, often it is likened to the feeling of love. So not necessarily that love is the only thing that is beautiful or the only feeling, but it's just that when we experience our connection to beautiful things, it's almost as if we are, for a brief moment, grasped with the same emotional core that we might get with a strong feeling of love. And therefore, a lot of writers have conflated the two and primarily focused on that. But so for me, it was really beautiful to see Silver go through her journey and frankly choose love there at the end. So, you know, like The Little Mermaid, where she turns into foam because she runs out of time. Mm-hmm. I love that with Silver, it's a conscious choice that she would rather be sea foam and have this man that she loves be happy than, you know, kill him. Which that was the addition to this. I was like, well, if you kill him, you fix it. I loved, that's where it made sense to me. Like, this is why you have two of them, and it's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I admittedly rooted for her to go through with it, you know.
Oh, me too.
I wanted her to do it because, yeah, he discarded her so easily, despite the fact that he told her exactly who he was and what he wanted out of that relationship from the get-go. I think, you know, he told her from the beginning, you're just an animal to me. And
yeah.
And she had that kind of magnetic pull that kind of aroused his baser impulses for sure. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he was never in love with her like she was with him. This was her first love. And I really, you know, just for the sin of breaking her heart, I was ready for her to rip open his throat. Because yeah, I love Golden and Silver so much. But yeah, I think that there would have been some kind of satisfaction, but not nearly as much as the utter heartbreak that you feel for Golden. And I love that's where the story direction took. I love that she held to her convictions in the end. I love that so did her sister.
Yes. I love that she really was like, I am a man-eater. And I am a siren. I am not a human being, and I'm not even going to pretend to be one. Yeah. And, you know, she could have just stood back afterwards and been like, that was my sister's choice, but like, no, fuck that.
No, yeah. And she was in a complete moment of immediate grief, too. I mean, that the one thing that was true throughout is that even if these sisters have diverging paths as far as interests go, they loved each other. These two were bonded so hard. So yeah, that felt completely authentic, both to Golden as a character and to their bond.
And I think that's also why it's so important that they chose to have the two sisters, because there are so many layers to it now. You have that familial love that sisters might have. You have, of course, chosen families addressed a little bit in the film as well. And then you have the fact of, you know, if it had been an either or situation of just, are we going to go for the cathartic kill him kind of ending, or are we going to go for the no, I choose love? You're going to get a split audience. You're going to have people who go like, well, I really didn't appreciate the depiction of somebody who doesn't stand up for themselves and like really choose themselves. Yeah. Because more of that, please. Right. But at the same time, there are enough people who are like, but do you know what it's like to like know it's wrong, but just be happy for, and especially if it's not a situation where he was being like horribly abusive to her, which is the case here. He really just He did things that are emotionally devastating. He cheated on her, and he got a new relationship. Very real. I love that they chose like real hurt there. That's everyday hurt. It's not the same as, you know, a locked-in abusive relationship, as a lot of films would have chosen to really kick that catharsis up. So it makes sense when she's like, why would I get in the way of him being happy if the whole point of being in love with him is to mean it?
Yeah, it would have cheapened those feelings if she chose self-preservation in the end.
Yeah, so I'm happy that we also have Golden to be like, nah, fuck that noise, and just kind of like take it apart, because you get both that you need, because both are just as important. I was rooting for Silver the whole time. I'm like, don't do it, you're better than this. I mean, you got your tail removed. You thought it was the fact that you were not human. That's why he wouldn't love you, but he said, I will only see you as a fish.
Yeah, and once she got rid of her, I mean, the loss of her lower torso lost her music. She lost her siren ability. She couldn't produce music, and the music was the one thing that they really did connect with besides this, you know, physical attraction. There was something, but yeah, once she lost that, there was no common ground. So why would he stay? The spell is broken.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking to see. I mean, it's nothing like when you're in the moment and you're rooting for her, but yeah, on a moral scale, he technically didn't do anything wrong except for not really consider her feelings.
Which is wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong.
Yes, but like not like a death sentence type situation.
Exactly. I mean, in movies, totally usually is. If it were like a slasher, we'd be like, kill him now. But this wasn't. And because it had been so grounded throughout the entire film, I was feeling the whole way through, like, this guy's a douchebag. And the big problem I am having in the conflict I'm having is he's not a liar, though. He has flat out made it clear how he feels.
Yeah. She's just first love, can't read the red flags, which is understandable.
Exactly. She's just going through the heartbreak that, you know, many of us go through very early in age, and unfortunately maybe later in age as well. But when you feel it, that's pretty much like you have that dilemma. Do I basically destroy them or do I just take a step back and do me, basically? And then you get the extra sense. Now, this is where the beauty really kicks up for me, is the knowledge that she'll die. So we have these sirens who are larger than life characters who seem impenetrable. They even kill them at one point by breaking their noses, throw them overboard, and then they're back, because why would you throw a mermaid in the water and expect them not to get better?
Yeah.
I thought that was very strange. Like, guys, okay, whatever.
I mean, to be fair, that they're humans who are not thinking like, what can mermaids do? They never really even asked. They really just treated them as, what can mermaids do for us? So it's like, we got to dispose the bodies. This is the quickest way to do it. Yeah, not connecting the dots.
Exactly. Like, oh yeah, let's just send them home. But it does prove that they're almost like immortal to an extent, because they were dead, and they came back to life. And then we have that tragedy of, in real life, if you have a sibling who is going down this path, who's putting their heart out there for somebody who doesn't love them, and you're trying so hard to appeal to them, you know, usually something like a wedding day is a moment where you're like, I'm here for you, and we're gonna build this back together now. You have the door finally opened because they got the closure, the clarity that they are not gonna be a part of this relationship. You don't get that as a siren.
No.
And so, yeah, all Golden has left is pain.
Yeah. It's that ending. Oh, that ending. It's so good. That's a hard lesson. I mean, I think one of the things that I love, I mean, obviously, besides what we've discussed thus far, is that it just leaves you with lingering feelings of what if and where next. Yeah. Because I don't know that there would have been any other recourse than what happened, which is fantastic. But what does Golden, look like in the future? She's going home with her tail between her legs, so to speak. she's got a hurt that she never anticipated. She entered the human world feeling fearless and unstoppable and leaving without the most important thing to her, which was, her sister. So it's like, what does that world look like? What does it look like for her? Because that's more than the loss of a first love. That's something that takes a lot longer to recover from. I wouldn't say get over, because you're not going to, but just that lingering thoughts and emotions that it leaves you with is just, it's a doozy.
And it's a doozy beyond just the fact that you lose a family member, but think about like how it's also this tale of like tradition versus more progressive, free-spirited thought processes. But then it's like it's like a cautionary tale of like, just because you don't want to believe everything that your elders have passed to you, because some of it is bias. Some of it is wisdom. And, you have Golden's like, well, you'll turn into sea foam. And she's like, oh, those are just myths. And like, uh-oh. Well, we grow tails when we hit water. I think we can believe things like sea foam a little bit. And Golden's trying really hard to be like, I don't know if that's something you should not believe right now. I'm talking to an elder who's been here for a while. And he's saying you need to, tone it down. So, of course, she has to reconcile with the fact that, she's constantly going to be walking, or I guess swimming around now, but with this feeling of, what if I got to her sooner? What if she had listened to me? How much of it is her fault? How much of it was Silver's own agency? How much of it can she respect? I can only imagine the complicated, just mess of thoughts going through her.
Which is so authentic. It's amazing that you can have this story of two mermaid sisters who are clearly as inhuman as possible. They eat flesh, but have it be so genuine to adolescence and the adolescent experience. I mean, it's a very teenager thing to think that you're invincible and infallible and the real world is not there, to hurt you. Yep. Like, you are not going to get hurt. And then you do. And that's where the adulthood happens. Like, It's not the sexual awakening that is the coming of age. It is the realization that you are not infallible.
And in their case, that is an actual survival thing. You have to be self-aware in order to not experience heartbreak. In fact, so coming back to aesthetics a little bit, I mean, they eat hearts. That's one of their main food sources. That's not that's not a coincidence or anything. That is very like laden imagery there of like they have to be callous monsters that eat hearts so that their own connections and their own fragile heart doesn't ever have to be in danger, basically.
Yeah.
Because, ripping the heart out of something is just inhuman. It lacks any sense of acknowledgement of the creature that you were ingesting as anything but food, basically. Right. So I love that they show that there, and how with these characters, you're also seeing that doesn't mean that they, as entities, as things that are alive, lack empathy and understanding, and they do have a lot of human emotions, but it just means that, physiologically speaking, this is something that they're going to have to do to turn off part of their brain, I guess?
Yeah.
This is where I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah, I think it is like a literal opening their hearts type situation.
Yeah.
to what is human experience like? Let's see what this is.
Exactly. And also it shows like the dangers that you might see in marginalized communities as well. Say, if you branch out and mix with others, there's nothing wrong, but you need to be careful and sheltered and make sure that connection that you have is true. Otherwise, everybody gets hurt.
Yeah.
Because you're not in the position to just let aggressors into your life, basically. And I like that they explore that here from the position of, in a sense, they actually have a position of power, but we find that they're actually more fragile in nature than we might have thought they were from the beginning. It's very complicated, and I love it for that.
Yes. There's so many ways of looking at it and navigating what you're presented with. And it never like you mentioned earlier, in musical form, they're going to spell everything out to you in song. And yes, I found love and I'm eating a heart. Like, that would be a song. But no, that's not how it goes here at all, which, is great, because then you're kind of pondering what this meant and what that look meant and what this wild little sequence in the middle meant. And yeah.
It is a very wonderful melding of cinematic language and musical language, in my opinion, because they let those really big, profound, clear narrative arcs take place in the more narrative cinematic moments, and then they accentuate them with the musical parts.
Yeah.
Which is super cool. I love seeing that. I want to come back to my quote real quick, so this is a quote that comes from a scholar by the name of Elaine Scarry. This is from her book On Beauty and Being Just. So it's not a super big book, but there's a lot of thinking going on in it. So it's a bit of a complex book. What she's trying to piece together throughout the book, though, is a different way of talking about beauty within academia. So first she kind of defends a lot of how people kind of brush it aside and honestly misinterpret it, so that she can finally get into how there are more moral implications on experiencing beauty, both in like beautiful people, in that sense, but more in also like beautiful objects or concepts and just how this shapes our world. But it's not like beauty is often considered like very dainty and fragile and broken.
Oh yeah, no.
Whereas that's why we have the sublime, to have this big masculine thing that is like, well, that overpowers you. And whereas 3,000-4,000 years ago, beauty did that. Anything that was beautiful just sucked your breath away and shook you to your core. Not because it frightened you, but because it was just like you could never achieve in your being what this feeling that is given you, you'll probably never give anything. Or at least that's what you want to do. And that's where her quote comes in, is how we seem to kind of project onto the beautiful object our desires, basically. The things that we need. So, and we are also sharing the essence of that. And that's the pinpoint of that quote, because she was talking about 3 different things, but that was the third thing, where she was more saying like, this is actually what she kind of felt. And that's more that beautiful things make us feel more alive, because they themselves, by being beautiful, are in a sense more alive for our emotional experience of them. I felt this was I want to get your feelings a little bit on that interpretation in context of this film, because that's kind of how I felt the girls were treated in the film, but also how the film treated its subject matter. And I wanted to know what you feel about that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to process where to start. I mean, I definitely think that quote fits for sure. I kind of get the sense that this band sees them as beautiful, but I think they see their music as beautiful, not them themselves. I think that it's like their artistry and talents is what's beautiful, because it is this interesting kind of contrast of what you would think of conventionally as beauty versus how it presents beauty, because there's nothing really about who they are. It allows gold and silver to be like more monstrous, right? They do. The actresses are definitely conventionally beautiful, but it doesn't really treat them as beautiful in the movie. And I like that. I think there's something powerful. I mean, they do. Like when you see the photo shoots and how they are kind of presented as burlesque, because the Polish translation for the actual title, like the lure is what it is, at least stateside, but Corky Dancingu is dancing daughters. That's literally what this translates to. So, I think they kind of glamorize them for the sake of selling them. But as far as they're actually concerned, they don't think of them as glamorous. They are kind of animals that they're exploiting. So I don't know. I guess it's this interesting way of like, to me, I actually find their more primal nature beautiful. Like, I find I'm attracted to their power and their free spiritedness and following through with their impulses and who they are and staying true to it. Like, that's the beauty that resonates to me versus the glamour that's being projected upon them.
Right. So I think Scarry would agree with you on this. I agree with you on this as well. That, when we, and this is one of the reasons I love discussing these topics with so many different people on the podcast, is to also open that up in our brains a little bit, and how beauty, they say beauty is only skin deep, right?
Yeah.
But there's a complexity to it. It's political, it's also ideological, and it is human. So there's a lot to it that is, it's a very complex emotion. Like, if you just try to conjure up what it feels when you're, feeling something beautiful when you witness it, it's hard to explain, right? It's just, you know it when you feel it. And it's also because it's pure. I think that's where it comes from, is things that are pure often give us a very strong sense of beauty. In the previous episode, I spoke with Danny Bethay about Gojira, and the quote that I used on that episode was more in line with talking about how the way we engage with beauty in a pure way is also just, we get delight from seeing things just as they are. So as you were saying, seeing the girls in their monstrous way is actually them demasking and showing us who they really are on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. There's something breathtakingly beautiful about that to me.
Yes.
You were right that they are conventionally beautiful and physically attractive and beautiful, and they do explore that a little bit, but as you say, they are too commodified and fetishized throughout the film. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the film is kind of doing here, is it's showing a very strong distinction between fetish and a beautiful experience. Because glamour, it can be beautiful, but it is still a commodity. It is, generated to do that. And usually it's still in the realm of fetish, even if we're not getting into sexuality necessarily, or nudity or anything like that. Just like glamorous makeup on a beautiful face. The face can be beautiful, the makeup can be beautiful, but most of the time, if it's glamorous, it's very processed. And I liked the distinction there, because I also felt that the moments when those girls really radiated beauty for me were often when they were not in costume and when they were just like hissing at each other.
Yes.
Things like that. So I just love this, because you really touched on something that I was hoping you were going to say.
Well, yay, I'm glad.
I mean, I don't feel there's any right or wrong to it, but it just really excites me when, like, yes, okay, so we totally agree on this.
Yeah, I think, well said about the fetishization and the glamour. The glamour really nails it about what, God, this movie is so complex. Like, the more you could pull at a different thread and reach different layers, it's mind-blowing to me.
Mm-hmm. And it also really depends on what lens you're choosing to look through as well. You could choose from the narrative. You could choose from just the images. Like, turn off the sound, watch it, see how it makes you feel. The music, the singing, all of it. It all kind of has a richness to it individually. So when you put it all together, it's just, interestingly enough, it's also one of those films that's really easy to just casually watch, I feel.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, that's also the perk of a musical, is that you can just let it wash over you and still get something from it.
Yeah, but I think it's quite interesting then to really, for anybody listening as well, at the very least, I think it's just interesting to really point out how we take for granted how intricate and meaningful a lot of the media we engage in actually is. Even if it is a popcorn flick, even if it is something that's designed to be pretty casual, doesn't mean that it's lacking complexity or heart, basically.
Absolutely. Every movie is technically a miracle. I mean, it is so hard to get a movie made, right?
Yes.
That doesn't mean they're all, winners, but to get that to you to consume, it took a huge Herculean effort to do, whether it's successful in its aims or not. But yeah,
Exactly.
The Lure is one that you could take literal and still enjoy it. Or you could, interpret that art in multiple ways and still continue to get stuff out of it.
Mm-hmm. That's an important phrasing there. So let's say we have somebody who's listening and they're just like, this movie was shit. They just hated everything. Music was shit. I don't like disco. 80s are overplayed. Mermaids are dumb. And those girls annoyed the shit out of me.
It's not horror enough.
It's not horror. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Anybody, they could say anything like that. And I'd be like, you know what? You probably are right from your perspective. And that's the thing. Taste is a huge distinction between experience. And I just feel that, like, yeah, as you're saying, like, it doesn't change the fact that there's stuff in it and what's going on inside the film. So please, everybody, do the extra step if you can. And I know it's really hard. It is really hard. But try to distinguish between your tastes and the value, or at the very least, the craftsmanship behind something that you're engaging with on an artistic level, because they are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Not liking something doesn't mean it's made poorly. And as you were also saying,
absolutely.
If something fails at what it's attempting, doesn't mean that it didn't try. So it's still in there. Just you have to look for it a little harder because it failed to make it as clear as they were trying to make it.
Yeah. Expectations play an odd role too in reception that I think it plays too much of a factor. What if you're expecting something, and that could easily affect something like The Lure, because you think horror, man-eating mermaids, you're thinking straight, killer mermaid monster movie or something with disco in the background.
Yeah.
No, it is 100% a genre bender. It does not, it's a little bit of everything.
It is, and it's an easy film to kind of write off because on the surface it makes it so... Yeah, honestly, it achieves something that is just insane that it can achieve, which is it is so digestible.
Yeah.
And that, people discount it very easily. I do. If there's a really easy to watch movie, let's say on Netflix or something, and I'm just scrolling through films, unless I'm in the mood for that, I'm very quick to just go, meh. It doesn't seem like it's going to interest me right now. I want something that's a bit more detailed or profound. And I don't know. You have to watch the movie to really determine that. And this is one of those movies that, as we have said multiple times, we're like, oh God, it's just so layered, it's so complex.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy to be listening to this and be going, what are you talking about? Depending on how you were thinking when you were watching this movie for the first time. So I do challenge anybody who saw it and was just like, I don't know, it's just a bunch of naked ladies with fishtails to me. Watch it again after with all these points in mind.
Definitely. There's so much going on beneath the surface, which is, pun intended, I suppose.
Very good. I want to come back to then just aesthetics in the way we're used to talking about aesthetics, visual sounds, things like that.
Right.
You mentioned that you're a big nut for practical effects. So
yes.
I have to know, what are your emotions when you watch the effects of these mermaid effects? Because I'm very curious.
I mean, I like them. I wouldn't put this at the top of my list, but I think that I just applaud the design of it, that I'm okay with what they get. Because I can't imagine that this is a huge budget. This is, it looks great, but I can't imagine that they gave this first-time filmmaker, like, here, go make a monster movie, because that's not what she was trying to do. So the tales work. You definitely can tell how they kind of shot some of these scenes.
Right.
So, this is not going to be like John Carpenter's The Thing or The Blob or The Fly or, no masterwork of practical effects here. But I'm okay with that because I think the design is what is important, and making sure that these are not these glorious fantasy Disneyfied Little Mermaids here. These are some monstrous beings that you would not, if you were in the water, diving and you saw this go by, you would not be like a sailor lured to his doom by beauty, And I like that. I like that contrast of expectation versus reality.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I really enjoyed how they actually kind of show this with the band at the beginning of it as well. You have the men who get kind of caught up in the song, but then you have the woman, the lead singer, who I guess was just drunk enough that it wasn't working on her. She's just vibing by the fire, about to go upstairs, and then she turns around and she just screams when she sees what's in the water.
Yes.
And all we see is them like shoulder like out of the water. So we just see naked girls in the water basically. So we're like, what did you see? And I thought for a moment that they had killed everybody because, siren's gonna siren. And no, it was awesome to see that they were in the dressing room and the band was still alive and all that. And I'm sure there had to be an interesting conversation that we did not get to see of calming that woman down.
Yeah.
And then when you see the design of the tails, I get it then, because just like with any fish, they have the different spines and scales and stuff that are to protect them. So they're just aggressive looking enough that you'd think twice before you would grab one of them by the tail or do anything, because it's going to cut you up.
Yes.
I loved that, but without them doing the thing where they've like fully transform and their faces change or anything like that. Just teeth.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because if they're mermaids, that's what you think of as a mermaid. So they do enough to retain your concept of what a mermaid would look like, but monster it up a bit, so it's not like the most wonderful practical effects in the land, but it's enough to really make an impact on what they're going for. So, it works.
But and I love to hear you say that as somebody who is a bit of a connoisseur for practical effects, because I think that's another thing that listeners and viewers of horror would benefit from, is this understanding that we can be critical. Of course, you can be critical of the application, but unless we're seeing an application that fails, like there are some wonderful 80s movies out there that you like. Kudos to them for even doing practical effects instead of just doing stuff off camera. But there are moments when you're kind of like, would you have been better off just making it mysterious and me not knowing what was going on? Because I can see that the latex came off of this person's face, or there's a piston that's in the shot, things like that.
Yeah.
And in this case, there is none of that. It's all handled very, professionally and done quite well. But as you say, like, well, there's no magic trick here. It's just people sitting in a bathtub and they have a tail flipping out at the end of it. It's not like rocket science material here. There's no like big CGI or anything to impress you with. But as you were saying, design goes a long way. So what are you conveying with the design? Are the colors nice? Are at the very least what we see on their bodies, is it seamless? Things like that. And I think they did a good enough job there that the suspension of disbelief was not pulled away from me at any point. In fact, apart from that first transformation, they do a great job of doing everything off camera, and you just kind of know. You're like,
yeah. I mean, there's like the scene on the shore where she's in the car attacking somebody, and you just see like a quick cut of the tail moves like slithering in the dirt or the sand. It's like, yeah. You know how that's done, but it's never to its detriment. Yes,
exactly. So again, I just broached this because of how often or how quickly we can get caught up in good. That word, good. And like, what is the value of good if everything else about it is effective? I like effective more than good. Is it effective? Because for me, a good story, is affecting. And if you can keep me in and not push me away, it's good. May not be the best, but it's good enough. And good enough is good enough, in my opinion.
Right. If you're not breaking that wall and taking the audience out of it, then you're pulling it off.
Exactly. And of course, acting can go a long way here as well. Like I said, a lot of these sequences where they're transforming, it's off screen.
Yeah.
But we see people looking at them. So they cut to somebody's face, so they can just like, you see that little glimmer in their eye of like, man, it's always fucking cool when I see this happen.
And I would rather that than, you know, we did something that definitely was going to distract.
Yes. I want to talk about at least one last narrative thing that, because we did discuss how the sisters are, you know, the protagonists, they're our main focus here. But there is just enough focus on the family band that I liked that they had, if you can't empathize with the creatures, if you do feel like the bassist and like you're just a fish to me, that they have some people who are really trying to figure out how they feel about all this and also explore their kind of toxic family life in the periphery of all this.
Yes.
So I want to give them just a little bit of attention because I felt there were some interesting things that kind of pop up here. And also, you know, I think we'll eventually get back to the ending of the film again. It'd be a nice wrap-up area.
Yeah, I like them. I mean, they add some comedic moments, especially between the husband and wife, especially at the wedding. But yeah, you get a sense that throughout the entire thing that everybody's very human in the sense that there's flaws, but that doesn't condemn them. You know, they're not written off as terrible people. They're just humans who make some not so great choices sometimes or oftentimes, but they aren't malintended for the most part. So, you know, like the bassist that crushes poor Silver's heart, you know, he says who he is up front and you understand. It does a good job basically of getting you to empathize and understand where these people are coming from. I think that the singer does have motherly intent. You know, there's definitely some mothering moments that, you know, and eventually her children outgrow her and she doesn't know what to do with that. And she's a little bit fearful, understandably so. So yeah, I think spot on. These people have a little bit more depth to them to kind of further enrich this whole story.
Exactly. I really appreciated that they weren't just foils for our protagonists, that they were just there to like have the story happen. That if you connect with them enough, you can sense the tragedy in their story as well and really feel for them and how them accepting these girls into their lives has kind of like just flipped the table basically. Like for all of the good, there's also a lot of unsaid familial drama kind of going on that they have to explore, and it's only through these dire circumstances that it actually starts to come to a head. I love the mother analysis that you've put on the singer because like I was saying with this quote here, it's like every single person that we see, at least the ones that are given a bit more of a more complex character, they all kind of project onto the girls what they kind of need out of them. So like for the husband, it's like, youthful women around him because he's in a band. He kind of is like, oh, cool, you know? And at the same time, as this businessman, he's like, and they're awesome. So we're going to do well. Like he's just happy that they're around for multiple reasons. You do have the singer who is just like, hey, another opportunity to be a mom because my son kind of had to grow up too fast. He's in a band. It's kind of how it felt there.
It also feels a little bit, I mean, maybe this is me reading too much into it, but it also feels like I am a woman in this very kind of male place. And so I can at least help you through this from a woman's perspective.
Absolutely. In fact, like she goes through a journey that we don't get to explore. And I love that they're like, let's just get to it. So she starts with, you're a monster. And then she's the one who's like, I have to protect these girls from all these lecherous men, basically. And she's there for them emotionally. And she's trying to like, hey, I'm the wisdom here. I know how this world works and how just disgusting it is for people like us, basically. Yeah. So no, I don't think you're stretching at all with that interpretation. And of course, the son is he's a teenage dude, so there's not much to that. But I love that they don't. He is a pretty blank slate of a character. But what I love is that they do have moments of just exploring them. So the moment they kill the girls, or at least in their mind, they kill the girls.
Yeah. thought they'd remove themselves of this problem. Yeah.
It all falls apart, and we don't really get any sort of exposition as to what they're thinking.
No.
Just emotions.
Yeah, it's this literal whirlwind music sequence that has no explanation. It is just a downward spiral that honestly can feel out of place. You know, I think if you are taking it at face value, you might be like, what the hell is happening right now? But yeah, I think that's kind of a manifestation of guilt of what they've done. I mean, the way that they look at each other after doing the deed, I think that all of their lifestyle is catching up to them at once. I think it's just this huge implosion that is so fascinating the way that they film that.
Yeah, and I think it's also because they all kind of, like you said, guilt is the good word here, because at first it's like you can blame whoever. You can blame the dad for, being the one to punch them in the face. You can blame whoever had the idea to dump them overboard. Yeah, so on and so forth. You're going to snowball that. But yeah, when they get home, they basically just realize, like, well, we all kind of wanted this. Yeah. For the same reasons, And of course, the only thing you can really blame is the industry. That's all they were thinking of, is their livelihoods and their lives being normal, quote unquote.
Right.
And I liked that through this just massive fight and binge and just sitting around and catching their breath basically for a night.
Yeah.
They're a family again when they go back to work. I thought that was so interesting how they come back together, because they were like, we're just going to share the burden together.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think that's also kind of a sign. I mean, it's this weird kind of fast forward a little bit. And,
it is, yeah.
And this, like, we've come back together, but we're broken underneath. Like, that's kind of a point of no return for them as they were, like who they were before. It's like almost a rock and roll funeral.
I love that, a rock and roll funeral. Yeah, exactly so. Plus, I do think that the reconciliation is also handled a little too quickly for my feeling. It's just Golden bites a finger off of the dad, just like, what? I'm not mad. And I get that that's just her power playing, like just to remind you to bite your limbs off.
Right.
But the fact that they want to return was the weird part to me. Like, why aren't you mad? I mean,
I think that they were a little bit. I think that for them, their ambitions had kind of taken precedence. And so it's like, all right, well, we're gonna make our power play, but they still have pursuits that they want. I think that's why, Silver's love, she still loves this person. She holds her parents, her human parents, so to speak, more responsible in her mind, I'm sure. So she wants to pursue him. Golden is she's discovering music through Triton. So I think that at that point it's like things are changing. They just haven't realized it yet.
Right. I guess I would have been interested in seeing that explored a little more. I guess more
That's
in
fair.
like maybe the family being really under the thumb of them emotionally. Maybe having more of Silver's love be, but maybe, you know what? As I'm saying it, like, no, I actually really love that Silver is just pure as hell. That there's really no ill will from her side of things towards, the boy. How she's just kind of like, not necessarily I forgive you, but it's love.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because at no point after that, he drifts off and he goes and gets married to somebody else, and she doesn't do anything to be like, remember, I'm a siren, which you kind of expect.
Well, I mean, by the time that he does that, she's lost the ability to sing. So
that's true. That is true.
So they end up together, but he's like not willing to consummate that for obvious reasons until she makes the choice that breaks the spell.
Sure, I guess I'm also saying, like, beyond a spell, like what I love with Golden, she didn't use a spell. She just scared the shit out of him. Like, I'm gonna kill you if you ever try that again. So I choose to forgive you, small humans. is kind of
Yeah.
what she did. So I was kind of surprised that Silver didn't take that on some level.
Maybe that was her power play, is just showing up, you know.
Fair.
Just the threat of being there and returning is probably a power play. Just a very nonverbal one.
That's true. Sometimes those are the more powerful ones.
Yeah, I mean, it's a ballsy move to be like, you did this to me, and here I am.
And now I hug you.
And yeah, it's like keep your enemies close type of fear. Can you imagine just dumping somebody overboard, thinking you've offed them, and they show up and they're just smiling at you? That's eerie.
That is very eerie. Yeah, you make a good point.
Yeah, it's minor, but again, it's like you have to unpack some of this stuff.
Yes. And there's still so much to it. So what I was getting to with the family then is it also changes a little bit that final scene. The more you know, since we did have a little bit of alone time with them and got to explore their guilt and the way they work as a family. And although, as you say, they were changed and they were broken as a band, I think it was more like they chose to be a family who have problems but have to do the band. So you kind of like just turn on your professional, okay, this energy is for the audience, but we're probably going to be pretty sad and eating quietly when we get home. And still there's a wholesomeness to that, the mere fact that they're not still like beating the hell out of each other constantly.
Right.
And so at the end, I just loved that when Golden kills him, neither parent does anything. Not to say that they gave up on him, but that they just, the looks on their faces of were like,
Yeah.
we knew this was going to end this way.
Yes. And it seems like mom goes to try and comfort, you know? She's a little bit bereft and like not sure how to go about that, because how can you know?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's almost like she wants to go to her. And
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's one of those almost like a trial by fire scenario where it's like these people they didn't intend to catch some mermaids, but they did. And eventually, you know, being together, you develop some bonds that weren't, I mean, they were genuine to an extent. It's not like it was a whole entire spell. So yeah, it's just kind of like this all around melancholic mood. You know, dad and mom kind of looking at each other tentatively of like what could have been. They're no longer together. You know, mom and dad got divorced. Son grew up and he's getting married to someone else who wasn't the chosen daughter, you know?
Yep.
So it's like this all around breaking up of a family it's a bummer.
And you lose all your kids. And that's, I think that was the look in her eyes, at least. Like, the reason why she's lost 2 of them, gone. And she comes to terms with that so damn fast. Probably because she could see it coming.
Yeah.
But then the fact that Golden swims away. Yeah. It was so she looked like she was about to jump in the water herself just to go try to talk to her.
Oh, yeah.
That, for me, was the extra gut punch. That they chose to really even try to make you care about these people that were kind of like, you know, set dressing for a lot of the exploits of these 2 girls. And it's just like everybody has a reason to be sad there at the end. Even Triton. They don't show him, but you know that he's like, yep,
yeah.
warned you.
He was, he called it. He tried to help, you know, even a little bit of a coach or mentor. So yeah, it's a downer. And I like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I mean, a good downer is a good ending.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if there were any other elements of it that you briefly wanted to talk about, or if you feel that we have covered just about everything.
I think we've covered it.
All right, yeah, I'm feeling that too. But, you know, it's a very complex film. I'm sure as soon as we're done recording, we're going to be like, we should have mentioned this. We should have mentioned that.
I don't know, but I do feel pretty good.
Yeah, me too. So yeah, really rich film. If you have listened this far and you still haven't watched it because you don't really mind spoilers, check it out. based on our description of this film, we may have given you some of the heart and soul of it, but hey, the endings are not the entirety of a story. So there's so much to it that is worthy of experiencing, regardless of what you know. So please be sure to check out The Lure. Well then, I'm going to briefly wrap things up. So before we get into our thank yous and endings and stuff, I'm going to do a little bit of not preamble, but I guess amble at this point.
Sounds good.
Post-amble. So this podcast is a part of the Anatomy of a Scream Pod Squad, so be sure to follow the Anatomy of Scream podcast page on your preferred podcast platform to check out more introspective, semi-academic, and fun podcasts, including 28 Days Lady-er, hosted by Sophie and Hannah Day, XOXO Horror, and much more. You can find more info at anatomyofascream.com. And if you are interested in more of my musings on beauty and horror, or just horror in general, you can follow me on Twitter, which is @_Shockaholic. And you can check out my website, which is shockaholic.org, which hopefully will have some changes soon if they haven't already happened, because I know this is a little later in December, but I am recording this a little sooner. But keep an eye on that website. Some exciting things are coming, and I hope everybody enjoys it as much as I have enjoyed planning it all. So, dear listeners, what are your thoughts on The Lure? I'd love to hear your thoughts on Twitter, which is @BeautyHorrorPod. You can email me at beautyofhorrorpod@gmail.com, or you can come onto Discord and we can chat about it in real time. So, a lot of options. But Meagan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me, talk about this, and for bringing up a movie that I'm just so happy that I have now seen and to have had in my life, because I think it was such a wonderful experience. Where can everybody find you, and is there anything you would like to plug in specific right now?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I am beyond thrilled to have introduced this movie to you. You can find me on Twitter @HauntedMeg. So yeah, that's it.
Lots of things going on, so many things. Just check her out on Twitter and you will see what she's up to. But especially check out the Bloody Disgusting podcast if you haven't done so, even though, I don't know why you're here and you haven't been there already, but please rectify that immediately. You'll have a lot of fun with her and all the co-hosts, which I hope to have on at some point as well. But that is a topic for another day. So for now, I want to say thank you, dear listener, for joining us and talking about the beauty that lurks within the horrible. Goodbye.